Welcome to Raising Unstoppable Teens podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly Shear, Teen Breakthrough Expert, and I am so excited with today's guest. So please welcome Brett Marciel to the show.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Shear.
Yes, I'm so grateful you're here, and I have waited for this for a while, eagerly awaiting this interview. So thank you. Okay, before we get into the questions, though, I would like to read Brett's bio. So Brett Marciel is the Chief Communications Officer for the Jason Foundation, a nationally recognized leader in youth and young adult suicide awareness and prevention. Brett has been working with the Jason Foundation since 2011 after graduating from the University of Tennessee. He is responsible for much of the content that comes out of the organization and has had articles featured in several newspaper publications. Brett currently resides in Hendersonville, Tennessee, with his wife and daughter. Okay, so Brett, we're going to dive into the questions. And my first question I ask all my guests is, what were your teen years like?
Well, I would say they were probably pretty typical, but I'm not entirely sure what typical teen years looks like. Very stable home life. School was pretty typical of what I would assume. Played sports. There was maybe some small evidence of bullying there, and maybe one handful of incidents that I could recall of personally when that's the case. But really, when I was growing up and in those teen years was right before and during the rise of social media. So it wasn't really something we were too invested in like today's youth. So if there was an issue with, let's say, bullying, or you had an issue at school, that issue in my teenage years was able to stop when you got off the bus, which I think can be, it was probably helpful during my age, if there was an issue of bullying, I just didn't have to go to that side of the neighborhood, when I got off the bus. So I think it's a fairly routine, if you will, teenage years. Didn't really struggle as much with some of the things that we see on a daily basis working here at the Jason Foundation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow. Thank you for that. Okay.
Absolutely.
So how prevalent is the problem of youth suicide?
Well, we call youth suicide the silent epidemic here at the Jason Foundation. And the reason we call it such is that we're losing young people at epidemic proportions, and yet we're not really talking about it. So interviews and podcasts such as this give us an opportunity to really create that awareness that is really necessary to properly address the problem of youth suicide. Mm-hmm. Here at the Jason Foundation, we focus mainly on the age group of 10 to 24. Since 2007, the suicide rate within that population has increased 55%. So we go off of the numbers. Some of these numbers that I'll use in just the next few sentences are from the CDC. So this is not a Jason Foundation statistic. This is looking at numbers reported by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So what we're really looking at in that age group is we're losing about 130 young people each week. 130 between that 10 to 24-year-olds each and every week is astounding. Without a platform such as this, many of our families, many of our youth wouldn't even know that the problem is as extensive, really, as it is. One thing that we look at as where suicide ranks as the leading cause of death, suicide is the second leading cause of death for those 10 to 24-year-olds, only surpassed by unintentional injuries, which is a grouping of occurrences, of incidents, of causes, if you will, Number 2 is suicide. Number 1 is the only grouping in that leading causes, top 10 leading causes of death that the CDC reports. And one thing that we are especially concerned with right now are even younger age groups, the 10 to 14-year-olds. When I was growing up, I mentioned, pretty standard and safe and loving environment when I was growing up. I didn't have much to worry about when I was 10, 14-year-old. Suicide within that age group has more than doubled in the last decade. And that's really troubling that we're looking at right now, because if nothing is done with that age group right now, they will only progress up, and we'll see higher rates in our middle and high school age groups, that 12 to 18, which again is second leading cause of death. And then even further on, the 18 to 22 or even into 24, where we take that young person, that high school student, you start moving more into that early adulthood, whether that's going into college or entering the workforce. Again, for that 18 to 22, that 18 to 24, in both cases, suicide is the second leading cause of death for them. Probably within the last 5 years, I believe it was, suicide surpassed homicide in that age group.
Mm-hmm.
Very recently, the CDC released results from their Youth Risk Behavior Survey.
Mm-hmm.
What this survey is a long questionnaire given to public high school students. And it really assesses these young people on risky behaviors that contribute to those top 10 leading causes of death. So there are information based upon obesity or violence, or I have ridden in a car without a seatbelt, or I've ridden in a car with someone who's been drinking. And there's 5 questions that are targeted at mental health and suicide. And 4 of those I'd like to share with you right now, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
So the first question that we really look at is, have you experienced a feeling of hopelessness or sadness over a period of 2 weeks or greater so that it affected your usual activities? And what this really is addressing is depression, and what can be considered the definition of clinical depression.
Mm-hmm.
What this means is, this is not something you can just lift yourself up out of, dust yourself off, really steel your resolve and get through it. This clinical depression is something that may need professional help, whether that's meeting with a psychologist, a psychiatrist, even possibly the use of medication.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that needs that professional help. And across our country, 36.7% of students answered yes to this question. So over 1 out of every 3 high school youth said yes to that question.
Oh, wow.
The second one that we really look at is, have you seriously considered suicide in the past 12 months? 18.8% said yes. One of the ways that I really bring that number about, we use a lot of numbers, figures, statistics in presentations, but I like to look at classroom size. We do a lot of educator trainings and professional development series. So if you start looking at your average classroom size, here in Tennessee, it's about 25, 26. I think the national average is a little less than that. But when you're looking at, almost 5 students out of every classroom that say yes to that question,
Mm-hmm.
it's quite concerning. And
Yes,
again,
yes.
really drives home some of the feelings that these young people are seeing in their everyday lives. This isn't, this is a self-reported survey. So take it for what you will, but a young person who answered yes, they've seriously considered suicide the past 12 months should be alarming at best. The third question that we look at is, have you made a plan to attempt suicide in the past 12 months? So we really go from a time of concern in a young person to a time of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We work with many behavioral health facilities, and during the assessment of their suicidal ideation, this is a question that's always asked.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is no intervening factor, nothing that's changing in this young person's life when they've made this plan, an attempt is almost assured. And 15.7% of high school youth said yes to this question. And then,
Wow.
yeah, it's alarming. Finally, the fourth question that we typically look at is, have you attempted suicide one or more times in the past 12 months? 8.9% said yes to this. So almost 1 out of every 11 young people said yes to this question. So in every single classroom across the country, you're looking at 2 young people that have attempted suicide.
Wow. It's bringing tears to my eyes, to be honest with you. It's just almost unbelievable, I guess, that it's that high and that there's that many kids that are either clinically depressed or, that have attempted suicide within the last 12 months.
And some of what we hear from people that we do present to, that we share this information is, well, maybe that was just a half-hearted attempt. That was them taking, let's say, 6 Tylenol, acetaminophen, because the bottle says do not exceed more than 4 in 24 hours. But we don't really like that term, half-hearted suicide attempt. As our founder will always say, he wishes his son Jason had made a half-hearted attempt. But what, in their minds, if they attempted suicide, and the issue was so large enough, the outlook was so dire, if you will, that they wanted the pain to end. So any attempt on that young person's life by themselves needs to be taken seriously. It's a cry for help. It's something we need to be concerned about and recognize and make sure that they receive proper care.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. So what do we need to do, or what tips do you have for parents as well as teachers? What do we need to do if we do suspect a young person is thinking of suicide?
Well, many times a young person, will exhibit warning signs prior to an attempt. So there are things to look out for. There's evidence, there's behaviors that are exhibited by a young person before an attempt. So we're not talking just minutes. It could be hours, days, weeks, even months before an attempt. So there are warning signs that are applicable to all ages that we need to be aware of. And so some of those warning signs, especially in young people, we can go through right now. Depression is one of the leading causes of suicide attempts across all ages. And oftentimes that's exhibited in out of character behavior. That could be abrupt changes in attendance. So your student, your young person who is always at school, never misses a day, and is never tardy, all of a sudden has trouble showing up. They're missing classes. They're late to meetings or practices if we're looking at athletes. Deteriorating academic performance. So your A-B student all of a sudden starts getting a string of C's, D's. They stop really caring about that performance that seemingly was so important to them before. Sudden changes in appearance is one of those. A young person who was always, made sure to keep up with their hygiene, was always bathing, liked to look good when they go to school or out with friends, all of a sudden just doesn't care anymore. That's not a priority for them. Changed relationships with classmates. One that always comes to mind is a outgoing young person, a very enthusiastic young person who has a wide range of friends, all of a sudden whittling down the people that they talk to or meet with or see, to a very few select people. It could be increased irritability or aggressiveness that's exhibited, and really a despairing attitude. That comes up quite a bit in the young people that we see.
Can it be the opposite too, where let's say somebody is, I don't know, I'm throwing this out, let's say usually quiet, and now all of a sudden they're the class clown and making jokes, and it's almost like they're masking what's really going on inside. you know, it could go the other way too. So really that, right? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. You are
okay.
100%
So
correct
the
there. So
key is if it's uncharacteristic, if you're starting to see
yes,
behaviors and actions that are uncharacteristic, typically of how this person behaves or appears or whatever. Um, you know, whether it's all of a sudden they're constantly making jokes or they're withdrawing and you know, feel kind of isolating themselves. Either way, if it's uncharacteristic, that's what parents and teachers should be looking for as a warning sign.
yes, you are
Okay.
absolutely correct.
Okay.
Um, typically we do think about it the way I explained it, but it's so very important to also recognize and understand what you said is completely true as well. So your introvert, one who, like you said, does not typically have that outgoing personality, then all of a sudden um, makes these changes that are,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, just so out of character
Mm-hmm.
and different from what you know that young person to be.
Mm-hmm.
You are absolutely correct.
Yeah.
They even come out sometimes with suicide threats. They can be as veiled as "I won't be bothering you much longer," or "You'd be better off without me." "I hate my life." Sometimes you can hear that.
Mm-hmm.
Or it may be so outright as "I'm going to kill myself." They're not always verbal, but there are sometimes threats that they exhibit before an attempt as well.
And
Um,
so I think with that, sometimes it's easy. This is just a hard thing to face. And whether you're a parent or a friend or a teacher, whoever, it's just tough. I mean, it's not something we really want to be in a position of kind of being in that sphere, so to speak. So I guess my point is that sometimes as a parent with a teenager, you might look at that like, God, she's so dramatic and so, you know, drama and trauma, kind of, you know, that she's just saying that, you know, I hate my life or I'm gonna kill myself. As opposed to really looking at that like, whoa, if that's said, let's step back and, you know, talk to your team, right? Actually take it more seriously than it's just, I mean, and you had mentioned irritability and that kind of thing, not just taking it as, you know, she's just moody or um you know, like it's just she's being overly dramatic. Like actually take that very seriously when they say things like that. And if it's just being dramatic, fine, but in case it isn't, always talk with your team, right? Is that what you would recommend, or what would you recommend? Something.
Absolutely.
Okay.
One of the things that we always recommend is to ask them. If they make comments such as that, be prepared to ask that tough question. "Hey, hold on. I know you said this, but are you thinking about hurting yourself? Or have you had thoughts of suicide?" Like you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
best case scenario is they come back and it's, "No, I don't actually feel like that."
Mm-hmm.
But the worst case scenario is that you kind of brush it off as someone being overly dramatic and they were serious about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you take those seriously, ask them about it, and be willing to listen.
Yeah, listening is really, really powerful. It's simple, and I know parents hear it all the time, but it's it it's just so powerful, you know. And most of the people don't really want to end their life. And I think I loved what you said about just be direct and ask them because they will tell you, you know, and then really listen to them. And then, of course, as you said, um, you know, which I'm sure we'll get into, but you know, therapy or medication or whatever, but seek professional help if they indeed have any kind of suicidal ideation. But really being there and asking that direct question, um, you know, really tells the team that they matter and you care and you're hearing them. And then on top of that, really listening to more of what they have to say, and really being present and not judging or shaming them is really key too.
Absolutely. I could not agree more.
Mhm.
So there are a few other things that we always like to promote and teach others as far as warning signs are concerned. And we kind of hit on some of it a little earlier, and that's just a lack of interest in something that they had previously really cared about, if you will.
Mhm.
It could be something such as the captain of a football team not wanting to play anymore. It can be the dancer deciding to stop being on the team. Your music-loving friend quitting a band. Those the lack of interest, whether in sports or hobbies, just the them stopping caring about something that was an integral part of who they were. Again, is kind of falls within that out of character behavior that
Mhm.
we want to be aware of. A preoccupation of death and suicide. Oftentimes, this is exhibited in writings or artwork. So
Mhm.
either essays, um, poems, artwork, drawings depicting death.
Mhm.
Uh, it could also be in the form of social media posts and comments, especially in this day and age. Luckily, with some of the platforms that are out there right now, such as Facebook, Twitter, I believe even Instagram, all have procedures in place now where you can report if you are concerned about a person on the platform, and then either they can reach out to that person who may be having suicidal thoughts, or you can,
Mhm.
and they provide some resources that you can use while reaching out to a friend who may be thinking about suicide. That's social media has kind of been a double-edged sword, if you will, when
Right.
we look at suicide. Obviously, we do know that it allows for the cyberbullying aspect, if you
Mhm.
will. Um, as I mentioned, when I got off the bus, if I was being bullied, it could end right there. I just don't have to go to that street, that side of the neighborhood. Whereas these young people are connected 24/7. I have my phone on me almost all times of the day as well. And so it doesn't have to stop when school ends.
Right.
That being said, now there are so many more uh, resources available at their fingertips, at all times. As I mentioned, some of those procedures in place by the social media companies and organizations. It's not something I would by any means blame for the rise in suicide rates.
Mhm.
Um, One thing I failed to mention earlier is suicide rates as a whole for all ages have been on the rise since World War II.
Mhm.
So it's not something only isolated to young people, but
Right.
there has been an increase over my lifetime and more. One of the things we do need to look out for are previous suicide attempts. There has been research shown that boys with previous suicide attempts have a 30-fold increase in the suicide risk compared to boys who have not attempted suicide. And to go along with that, girls with previous suicide attempts have a threefold increase in their suicide risk. So if you know about a previous suicide attempt by a young person, it's not something that you need to keep secret. It's
Mhm.
something that needs to be shared, especially if you're an educator. This is not something that you need to keep secret from parents. Um, if you're a friend, you don't need to keep a suicide attempt secret. It's something you need to tell to a trusted adult, whether that's a parent or a favorite teacher, a coach, some trusted adult or a counselor
Mhm.
needs to hear that information. So please don't ever keep a suicide attempt a secret. As I mentioned, youth are much more likely to die if they've had previous suicide attempts. And then finally, what we do see are final arrangements. This is sometimes seen in girls making funeral arrangements. I want this to happen. I want these flowers. I want this song played. It could be giving away a prized possession, something that they really hold or cherish, um, putting their affairs in order, or saying goodbye to family or friends, kind of making peace with maybe something that has been outstanding in their life.
Mhm.
Now, some of what we just covered here can be seen as just your typical teenage angst, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
These are behaviors that, yeah, there's going to be changes in appearance or, out of character behavior. Well, they used to not sleep at all. Now they're sleeping, 10 hours a day. It's the teenage, it's young people growing up. It's when you see multiple of these warning signs across an extended period of time. So again, we look at that 2 weeks or greater. So if you start seeing multiple of these signs across an extended period of time, we do need to become concerned and be ready to take action.
Mm-hmm. I think too, I mean, even if you, I guess intuitively, even if it's before a 2 week period, or act on that intuition, because it's better to be safe. And again, it's that communication or just checking in with them can be obviously save their life, because you just don't know, and you don't know what's, especially with teenagers, always know what's going on internally. And so having a professional or someone skilled in this area, can be of great help, and help to get, your teen through this and through their depression, and even the medication. I think I had this conversation with my daughter actually recently, but it's also something I noted in either one of the courses you offer, that I took or something. But if a medication doesn't work, sometimes we just then think, well, it's just not working, and we don't go that extra step. And there is so much out there, and so many different, like a psychiatrist would know, all the different types of medication, the different dosages, different combinations, I guess, that could really work for your teen. So it's important that if they're on medication and they're still feeling depressed or showing other, they're still struggling in some way, bring that up to the professional, because they don't need to continually struggle. There are ways out of that. And the other piece to that I want to mention, and I'm not sure if I heard it through you guys or not, but we can tend to think that a medical doctor has expertise in the mental health, and that isn't always true. Now, a medical doctor usually can rule out any kind of organic cause to depression, right? And then you'll probably want them to go to a, psychologist and or psychiatrist after that. But sometimes the medical doctors, they might prescribe one kind of antidepressant, for example, and basically kind of call it good. Whereas again, a psychiatrist, I think that is their expertise. So they can kind of play around and see what is going to work best for your son or daughter. Just things I think to keep in mind, because we don't want to give up on this, especially if they're having thoughts of suicide or they're clinically depressed, as you said.
Absolutely. We can't, here at the Jason Foundation, overstate the importance of behavioral health specialists. Like you mentioned, a medical doctor may be the start of it, but it's very likely that it could take a different kind of professional to get the proper help that you need. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't stop at a primary care physician if that's where the conversation begins. If you do need more support, don't stop there.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that I think is important to note, because I've seen this, is that your teen's friends are more likely to kind of see some of these things or hear some of these comments more than maybe even the parents or the teacher or whatever. And so I think that's important as well, because especially if and I think too, I don't know, but don't sometimes teenagers kind of feel like they don't want to be a burden too? So I mean, there's a lot more that goes into this, and for the reason that they might give a warning sign or only give it to their friends and not really to their parents and stuff. So it's really critical, and this is part of what the Jason Foundation does, I think, is where you educate other teenagers and the so that they because they're often the first ones to kind of sense something might be up with their friend, right? Or do you just
Yes.
educate the parents and teachers?
Nope, you are 100% correct on that front as well. We have found that what we need to really do is reach all of the areas of influence on a young person's life.
Well
So we
stated.
try and create what we call a triangle of prevention. So what we focus on are the three main areas of influence on a young person's life that we have found. Obviously, we want to reach the parents. There's a special relationship between parents and their children. But you are correct. Oftentimes, a young person will see warning signs in their friends far before anyone else.
Mhm.
So we've got programs and initiatives focusing on the friends of that young person and for the youth themselves. And then finally, we look at educators. And we started to adapt some of our programs to include other professionals
Mhm.
in that kind of group. So whether it is a youth worker or a coach, or really just we're trying to really gather in all of the other adults that a young person comes into contact with on a regular basis.
Mhm.
So then that could be the counselor at the school, or like I said, a youth worker. But really what we want to do is to educate all of those groups of people that come into contact with this young person, so that altogether, all of them have an opportunity to recognize a warning sign that that young person might be exhibiting. Again, whether it's that parent, the youth, they spend more times with their friends than anyone else. And
Mhm.
if we're looking at school and extracurricular activities, there's a big chance that a young person can be at the school for a greater period during the day than at home,
Right.
especially awake. If we factor
Right.
in time asleep, most young people aren't exhibiting warning signs while they're asleep,
Mhm.
and so that is, we obviously want to educate our parents about what to look out for and provide the resources that are out there. But it's so critical to get in front of those educators, those teachers, those coaches, that they're always around as well.
Yes, and that's one thing that I love about your organization, because I've been kind of on the, in the school system with my girls, and I don't, sometimes I guess some of the warning signs of other students, there wasn't really the response I would have anticipated. And I don't know why that is. I don't think it's due to a lack of training, maybe, because I think, um, they're mandated. But, I don't know. But I do feel like there's kind of a gap there that thankfully the Jason Foundation is trying to close in on. So teachers, are not only educated and trained in this to spot warning signs or to be on the lookout, but actually respond, and take some action when they see the warning signs, instead of just kind of like noticing a drawing and like, yeah, it's a little bizarre, but she's a good kid. I mean, kind of thinking like that. She's a good kid, gets good grades, and it's just she's again chalking it up to some kind of typical, um, teenage whatever, just being different or whatever, as opposed to really seeing it maybe as a warning sign. I think that's really important. And I've also seen parents. I mean, it's very sad. I mean, within my own community, with signs and posters for missing children, teenagers, breaks my heart. It's hard for me to say without tears, but and then later they're surprised, I'm shocked that their child committed suicide. So when you talk about these warning signs and the education and really paying attention and taking action on that, it's difficult of a topic, and as scary as it is so important that all of us have that training, and that we all know what the warning signs are, and that we just take action. We just do. I mean, whether that's, and for kids, for, a teen's peers, even if it's just telling your mom, if you don't feel comfortable going to the school counselor or whatever, tell your parent, and hopefully they can alert the teacher or go to the school psychologist, and kind of take that responsibility off your plate. But tell someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where some of that stems from is that those teachers, those professionals, maybe haven't had the training. They don't know what to do. If you've never been trained on what to look out for, you've never been given resources on where to go to for help. If you're an educator and you don't know your school's protocol, if you think that a young person might be suicidal, you don't know what to do. You don't know the steps to take, who to approach. So those are all very important aspects that all professionals and all parents, even the youth themselves, need to hear and to be aware of.
Right. And that's why I like what you said about the, kind of the triangle of influence, even though it's spreads out to coaches and stuff, but we'll kind of, I think that kind of with the teachers, I'm going to lump them in that category, or youth workers, whatever. Again, this is something you guys provide. It's free, to where you can educate yourself, on the warning signs and even how to respond. Oh, I want to get to that too, because you have a really cool app, which I've been sharing with everyone, and I have it on my phone. But it's things like that, because knowing how to respond is key, and knowing, and I guess responding to the warning signs is really what's going to save a life. And if these teachers haven't had the training, and again, if parents have it, or if the teens have it, then that kind of is a safeguard, I guess. We don't want to rely on any one influence, right? So that's why I love that you're educating and training really everyone, in what to look for and how to respond. So hopefully somebody catches it and takes action, right?
Absolutely. The more that we can get trained, the more likely that a young person is identified as struggling with thoughts of suicide, or thinking about attempting suicide. And as you mentioned, the more people we can get to, the more that we can surround a young person who may be at risk with those that care, that know those warning signs, and then know what to do afterwards, the more likely we are to be able to have that intervention before that plan is acted upon.
Okay. You want to talk about the app yet? Or I did have a question about COVID and suicide. So do you want me to ask that first, and then we'll get into the resources of the Jason Foundation, which I'm sure the app is part of that? Do you want to,
Sure, whatever.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, I mean, with COVID, how has that impacted the mental health of people?
So this is something that is very new to us still. Some of the statistics and the behavior. So we talked about that youth risk behavior survey. Well, that was actually taken in 2019. That is the most up-to-date survey that we have from the CDC. But when did COVID hit here? March, I believe it was. Maybe even the beginning stages of, or like we started seeing that maybe in February. So a lot of it is still new. There's not a whole lot of research out there, but there are things that we know are affecting young people. For the longest time, we were seeing increases in loneliness or depression, not being able to go out, not going to school. And though many schools now are back into the swing of things, some are still doing remote learning, but we're losing some of that social support system that these young people have built on. You've got these friends to lean on in times of need. When you need to go speak to somebody that is your peer, you had that before. Now that might not be as readily available. we need to be watching out for people who had underlying conditions. This social isolation that's been recommended to help, stop the spread of the virus can really exacerbate problems that were already there.
Mm-hmm.
That can be because it's harder to access resources. Maybe that young person was already going to a psychologist and having regular meetings, but now they don't have the opportunity to go in. Maybe using that telecommunication with that healthcare professional isn't working as well as that face-to-face contact. Now, utilizing telehealth and telephonic medicine, any time that we can get in touch with that healthcare professional is great, but there is a possibility that it's not as effective as a face-to-face communication when it comes to that. So what we really see is a possible rise for mental health needs after COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
In our line of work, we really expect to see the needs of people, whether it is counseling or dealing or struggling with suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideation. We strongly believe that after COVID-19, we get past that the need will be far, far greater for the resources. So we're kind of trying to position ourselves to meet that need, if you will. It has long been known, and studies have been conducted that shows that suicide rates increase with unemployment rates. And so right now, that's something we obviously need to be concerned about.
Mm-hmm. I want a couple of things that I'd like to say with that is ironically, I just interviewed a college student, I think on today's Monday, on Friday, actually. And the topic he chose was loneliness. That's what he wanted to talk about and share his message. And, he was talking, in some ways, he had kind of a different perspective on loneliness that wasn't so kind of so negative or so depressing, but he did also bring up some of the impact of COVID and remote learning and the social distancing and all of that, and the loneliness and not having the social support or feeling supported or that physical, that hug, that physical touch that just, as is so beneficial. From their peers or from their coach, kind of that high five or something. So that's interesting. And that was his choice of the topic. It was loneliness. The other thing I want to bring up, and I've noticed a lot of the teens I've worked with, I have noticed an increase in the depression. I have also had more teens thinking about suicide. So intervening with that has been something that has been on the rise that I've seen in my practice. But the other thing I wanted to bring up in what you're saying with COVID is that even with the remote learning, and it varies by school. Some teachers, they do their lecture and then they hang out and you do your homework while they're there and they can answer questions, that kind of thing. It's not the same feeling you don't have that same interaction to where, let's say you're feeling, you want to talk to someone. It takes a lot of courage to open up, even to a trusted teacher. So, if you're in class, you might just have that inkling to do it and you will wait till everyone leaves and you might go up to the teacher. Whereas with remote learning, I almost feel like it puts more of a distance. So even you're not going to feel as comfortable, obviously, being on Zoom with all your classmates or whatever online, even to do a chat or, you know what I'm saying, to really connect with the teacher about some of these feelings that you have, or the sadness or the depression or whatever. So I think that maybe our teens and young people are because there's not that daily interaction that they get with the teacher or coach or whatever in person kind of hinders their willingness, if you will, to kind of open up and maybe talk to someone about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we're putting more stress on the parents for that as well. A lot of what we see as far as referrals and identifying young people who may be at risk come from schools. So now if they're not in those schools, more of that onus is put on parents. And yet the parents are still having to work, having to,
Right.
be there and provide for young people. So it's unfortunate that it's something that is even more important right now for parents. It has always been important, but we lose that interaction, like you mentioned, with other adults that could recognize these signs.
Wow. Wow, I'm so grateful for the Jason Foundation because, like I said, and we'll get to the resources in a moment, but I encourage every parent and every one of our listeners to visit your website, which we'll mention in a bit, because there's courses, you guys do free webinars, there's trainings, there's something for everyone in that triangle of influence that you guys provide, and most of it is free of charge. So there's really no excuse for us not to become more aware and and really learn how to respond. I mean, to me, I was thinking about this earlier in anticipation of the interview, and I was just thinking, like, this is kind of like CPR and first aid training. I mean, that was an analogy. You never want to use it, but if you're trained in it, and if you were ever in that situation, you could save a life because you've been trained in it. And I feel that way about educating ourselves with the warning signs and the statistics, and even getting the training, which is offered by the Jason Foundation. But which leads me into what resources are available from the Jason Foundation. And I know it's quite extensive because I just love all that you guys are doing, but please share with our.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of our programs and resources are available at no cost. So any DVD, any brochure, any training that we offer, anything, whether it be live or via webinar or on a Zoom, there's no cost to the community. So anyone can access our wide range of programs and it won't cost them a penny. We find that so very, very important that, being able to afford a program isn't the determining factor when it comes to getting a possibly life-saving program. So just want to make that clear. All of our materials and programs can be obtained or ordered through our website, which is just jasonfoundation.com. For the parents out there, we have a parent resource program, which is a website specifically dedicated to that parent-child relationship. It's got all that information about warning signs. It's got information about risk factors. So there are certain factors in a young person's life that makes it more likely that they attempt suicide. So it's just certain things you need to be on the lookout for. For instance, LGBTQ youth are 3 to 5 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. So that's an example of one of those risk factors that you need to be aware of. Obviously, not every LGBT youth will attempt suicide, but again, it's more likely that they attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. We also have a resource library on that parent resource program website, and it's a list of different studies, white papers, journals, articles, things like that have to do with other parent-child relationships. So that one is so very, very important and helpful. It provides a lot of resources out there. And then also we have our parent and community seminar. That was actually the first program of the Jason Foundation over 22 years ago now that we started offering the public. And it's about a 2-hour long seminar, again, available for free. The presentation is conducted by our president, Clark Flatt. His son was Jason, who the Jason Foundation is named after. And he really goes into how to look out for your child, what to do in the event that you recognize that your child may be struggling with suicidal thoughts. As you mentioned, we do have programs for youth as well. I usually put in our app there. It's called A Friend Asks.
Mm-hmm.
You can search Jason Foundation on the Apple App Store or Google Play for Android users, and it's got a wealth of information. Again, covering some of those warning signs we talked about, covering those risk factors, what to do if you think a young person may be thinking about suicide, and almost as important is what not to do. There are certain things that you can say or certain actions that you can take that will actually make it more likely that a young person attempts suicide after they've confided with you about struggling with the problem. Probably one of the most important aspects of that app is the Get Help Now button. The
Yes.
Get Help Now button will connect you to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. And again, it's a 1-800 number that not many people are going to remember in the event that they're in a time of need. So if they do know they have this phone, they have this app, they can go and click on that Get Help Now button. That'll connect them to a local 24/7 hotline with staff clinicians that are there to help. So a friend asks, strongly recommend it, with having your smartphone on you at all times. That it seems everybody nowadays does, not just young people, but even adults. That information is available and beneficial to anyone. Again, available for free. Strongly recommend going and downloading it as well. We also have our B1 project. This is really a peer support program. It's designed for middle and high school age young people, but we've seen it adapted for older as well. And so it's all about being there for a friend. The theme is someone you know may need a friend. Be one. And so then it teaches them to be aware of the problem, be prepared to ask that question, and know what resources are available for help. And then probably our most widely used program is our professional development series. And this is what I'm assuming you were speaking about when you talk about going through some of our trainings.
Yes.
There's a series of, I think we have now 9 training modules that are available. We have 4 2-hour training modules that really extensively cover suicide, youth suicide, suicide prevention. And then we've started to branch out a little more and do smaller 1-hour training modules. And they're based upon topics and how they relate to suicide. So we have one on bullying and suicide. We have one on non-suicidal self-injury and suicide. So what that is cutting. Many times someone who is cutting themselves is not attempting suicide. What that does is release endorphins to make that young person feel better. And so it is worrisome, but there's a difference between that non-suicidal self-injury and attempting suicide. So we've got 5 of those that kind of branch off into different subjects. And those, like I said, that professional development series is available online, and then the 2-hour trainings are available for DVD if you have a group that wants to view these. We most recently came out with a first responder module. So it's addressing youth suicide and how a first responder can address that within their community. And then on the second half of that training, we take a look at suicide within the first responder community. Especially right now, there's first responders working around the clock to ensure our health, whether it be firefighters, EMT, workers within hospitals. So that constant stress, being a part of situations that are, either violent or just very stressful, can take a toll on these first responder workers. So we just released that this year. We're very proud of it. And as you mentioned, we've been doing several webinars as well, free trainings online that you can participate in as well. And then we have various other awareness initiatives, if you will. One of our probably most successful ones is I Won't Be Silent. It's based off of a hashtag, and it's all about raising the conversation of suicide awareness and suicide prevention within your community. learning the warning signs associated, and then challenging your friends or coworkers, and creating events to allow them access to those warning signs, and to learn more, and taking a pledge to not be silent about this silent epidemic of youth suicide.
Hmm. Wow, I love all of that. The first responders, I mean, that's brilliant. Um, and again, you guys recognizing the need and providing that information or course and education training as well. For that's anyway, that I didn't know that, so that's like totally cool. And then also I love about taking the pledge, because to me that's consciously making a commitment to spread awareness within our community. Because again, as much as you guys, and you've been around, did you say 20 plus years or longer? I forget what you.
Yes, a little more. We started in 1997.
Okay. Yeah. So you've been around for a while. And again, I just see a lot of gaps in different, just different organizations, even that, I don't know, just a lot of gaps in not being fully educated or trained in how to respond and what to look for with suicide. And I'm so grateful that you guys are trying to close that gap, because on the one hand, you're saying it's been rising. And then on the other hand, and yes, there's more awareness and stuff through programs like yourself, but there's still a long way to go from what I see in my own community and some of the schools in my community. So there's no cost, and this is what it takes. So I encourage every one of our listeners to not only share this out, but to go to jasonfoundation.com and just there's something in there that will, quite a few things that I think will be of interest and help. It helps me to feel more educated, more equipped, and more updated, I guess, than my previous training. So it gives me more confidence in knowing how to respond. So I've been very grateful for the courses and the other resources that you make available to really anybody at no cost. So I want to thank you guys for that. It's outstanding organization. So yeah.
Absolutely. Again, I very much appreciate the opportunity and the platform to come out and speak about this issue. If we have more people willing to do so, it's an opportunity, like I said, to really reach more of the community and those that can really be benefited by one or more of our programs.
Absolutely. So, well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to be here with us and to, spread the awareness, to educate us. Brett, I'm very, very grateful. So.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yes. So that concludes our show for today. So here's to unstoppable teams, unstoppable dreams.